Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment of the weekend show. The topic of discussion is International Women's Day 2020, which is holding tomorrow. International Women's Day, better known as IWD, is celebrated on the 8th of March every year. It is a focal point in the movement for women's rights, social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women worldwide. The day also marks a call to action for accelerating women's equality. IWD has occurred for well over a century, with the first IWD gathering in 1911, supported by over 1 million people. Today, IWD belongs to all groups collectively everywhere. IWD is not country, group, or organization specific. Joining us in today's program to discuss this, we have
Bukky Williams. She is the Executive Director, Education at Vaccine. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
It's also my pleasure to welcome Isilomoh Braimoh. She's a HR practitioner, a media personality, and a reality TV star who was in the last Big Brother Nigeria. We just have to mention that.
You have to mention that. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, ladies. So the theme for this year is Each for Equality, and it's a very, very important theme because we know it's the decade of action, especially for the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and a lot of organizations have plugged into that. So what does this mean to you, and what do you think as a people we can strive to achieve in this decade of action? I'll start with you, Bukky.
Sure. I think this year is actually really an exciting year in terms of 2020, like you said, for the decade of action, but also 25 years after the Beijing conference, which is significant and a turning point in the women's rights movement, right? Because you have this platform of action that was decided by women from all over the world, including Africa, who even pushed for the girl child to be included as a platform. And what you've seen since then is actually ministries and gender commissions being set up. You're seeing a lot more laws against gender-based discrimination that's happening, even though we're still waiting for the GEO bill in Nigeria, the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill, but you've also been able to see the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. So you've seen definitely a lot of progress, but there's still so much more to do, so much more, like implementing those policies, investing, putting, our money where our mouth is to do that, or even around girl education. We're seeing parity now at primary level, but then when you see the difference between the number of girls who are in primary school and by the time you get to junior secondary school, the drop is significant. So there's still so much more to do. We're still talking about maternal mortality. Nigeria, I think, is 4th in the world in terms of the highest number of deaths, right? And a lot of them are teenage and young women. So there is a lot of work to do. So for me, this is a time for us to think a little bit of soul searching, really, and to really look at, okay, yes, we've come this far, but we have so much more to do. And in what ways do we need to do them? Because at least we can learn from the lessons of what we've implemented over the past 25 years. We know what works. We know what to do. So now it's not time to really say, let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's see.
I think I absolutely agree with Bukky. I think this is the year to actually be about it and not just talk about it. Even for those of us that are feminists and the men who are the feminist allies, I think this is the year that it's not just to tweet things and say intelligent things on Twitter and say intelligent things on Instagram. It's time to speak up. Women like me who are in positions of HR who actually fire. What are you doing to have diversity in your organizations? I think it's also about having the uncomfortable conversations, because there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations to be had, and topics around women and equality. For example, only 50% of women are in 7 occupations in Nigeria. 63 or 65% of employment, or men are employed in senior positions, as opposed to 30-something% of women. So how do we actually bridge the gap? What conversations are we having? Let's just be people that are about it. Let's just not talk about it. Let's take action. Absolutely.
I love that. Let's do it.
Yes.
Like, we've talked a lot. Finally, let's do it. And it's so important that the both of you have reiterated what each other has said in terms of moving from just conversations, moving from, the talk shops to actually getting on the ground and implementing these policies and laws. An interesting conversation around gender parity, gender equality is the fact that men feel left out of this conversation. I'm sure Andy might talk about it. Every time I am, somewhere talking about the girl child, you have that one person in the room saying, what about the boy child?
I mean, obviously, I hear that. But it's really not about you guys. I think it's simple. We can only talk about women because for years we have been at the periphery and we have been disadvantaged. And so we care about you, but not really. we are trying to, we're trying to get to a point where we are equal and we're not asking for anything exaggerated. And I think men are entitled to have their feelings, but there's no place for the feelings of men in feminism, to be honest. I think what we need our men to do is speak up in the face of patriarchy. Speak up when you see that injustice being done. Speak up when you see that a lady who is doing the same work as you in your office is being severely underpaid than you. Speak up when you see a woman in the boardroom is being talked over. Speak up when you see a lady being harassed on the streets. That's what we need you to do. That's what I'm going to say about that.
Yes. Look, I do think there's a role for men and boys in this conversation. But exactly like she said, it's not about saying that, when we keep seeing these kind of panels, it's very rare, right? That there's more women than men on a panel, right? We started calling them manos because you see so many men who are the ones talking, even about gender equality. And so the conversation, when I talk about it, is like the role of men and boys is to talk to other men and boys.
Absolutely.
Right? Because what happens is that even though you as an individual man is not the only one, exactly, it is this system that exists that places you above women for various reasons. And your role is to say that, no, this isn't right. You know what I mean? So what can we do about it? So how can we have more conversation? You as a man, create safe spaces for your boys to have those conversations and to say, like, what can we do to change it? In what ways am I contributing to the subjugation of women? Not only the ones in my life.
In general.
In general, right? In what ways are we supporting systems that continue to perpetuate violence against women and girls? We're looking at issues of child marriage, right? We're looking at issues of female genital mutilation. We're looking at ways in which we're discouraging girls at adolescents from being science majors because we think, you're not as smart. Or you won't have time when you have children. Who would, take it when you're doing your research? And, boys should be being like, no.
They can do
Bring on the competition. Let's do this. And I think it's really important for men and boys to see themselves in that role. Not that, it should be that, okay, there's this issues of like, now that both men and women are working, women should contribute 50%. Men should contribute 50%.
Really upsets
However,
me.
you don't cover the fact that women do a lot of unpaid care work. Right?
Absolutely.
So
in the family.
Exactly. So how are we compensating women for that? So when we have conversations, help us be able to actually address and properly analyze what the problem is and discuss it with other men, because men sometimes don't hear us.
They don't hear us.
They listen, but they don't
they're not really
well, you know what? They would hear their fellow men.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
speak.
Absolutely.
Speak out. I want to see it.
Bukky, talking about speaking, you actually touched on my next question a little bit, and this comes in when you talk about education. One of the problems which we face when filling the gaps and talking about inequality in the workspace is when people go to school, there's a tendency, like you said, for the boys to do the science, the professional courses, then the women go to the arts and the humanities. And it's not even like there's a law stating that anymore. I have a master's in computer forensics and we're all boys. And this was about 10 years ago. Now more people have entered into that space. So with what you do with education as a vaccine, how are we guiding the girls from an early stage to let them know that they can actually play in whichever field they want, as opposed to the easy one, which would let them still participate in a lot of free care activities which they have to carry out in society and at home?
Yeah. I just want to correct something really quickly. As a humanities major doesn't necessarily make it easier, right? Because there's always this sense that science is a little bit more difficult than humanities, you know. No, this is not the case. You know. Yeah, I understand. But so there's that. But I think, for the work that we do at Education as a Vaccine, a lot of the work we do is around how do we uphold the rights of women and girls, right? That's a really critical conversation because we also look at it from the health angle, right? And about how do you provide information to girls and how can they advocate for themselves. So an example that I would give of the work that we do is in Kaduna State. We started creating safe spaces for girls to have conversations about issues. The most popular topic is about their bodies because often we don't talk to girls about their bodies. But when you start with that conversation and remind them that they own their bodies, they get to make decisions about their bodies, what's that happening is that they start to look for more information. And often we see girls who have dropped out of school want to go back to school and have an idea of what they want to do. So it's a reminder for girls that you can accomplish anything. You have the skill sets, you have the intelligence, you have the power to make those decisions. So for me, I think the big critical thing around education really is about letting girls know that they have a right to be there. Because often in those spaces, we kind of remind girls that, you're here because, we're just letting you. Or when we make an argument for secondary education, we're like, please, let girls finish secondary school because then their child will not die before the age of 5. It's still not about the girl, right? And so for us, what we're saying is it is about the girl. Because if you invest in her, if you give her the space to develop, then, she can change herself, change the world around her, which is secondary, not the primary.
But still on my question, I know Isi wants to say something. When it comes to the competitive advantage, especially for managerial positions, there are a lot of those gaps which are not being filled by women because the system has been structured in a way where people are being pushed to different roles based on their gender. So what can really be done at this managerial position where, look at the National Assembly in Nigeria, for instance, the number of women dropped from about 10% to 7?
Or 6 or something.
Exactly. Exactly. And then in different offices too, the number of women leading organizations, and they do great at it compared to men, is still very low.
Okay. So the question you're asking me is how do we
get the girl child, the women to those...
Okay, so there's a couple of things that have been advocated for. One, right, which people don't want to talk about is the quota system, right? It's about ensuring that you actually, start from the beginning of saying that when you put in applications, one of the things you see nowadays is that women and persons with disability, are encouraged to apply. So you have to create a welcoming environment. And then you also have to go beyond that. Because you're not just going to open it, in terms of it. You have to look at the way society is structured. Often, women, as we know, there's a gender gap in terms of access to internet. We know there's a gender gap in terms of access to technological tools. So a lot of those things is to make sure that if you really do want women in that space, you target it. You go out and headhunt. You go out and look.
Bring them in.
Exactly, and bring them into that space and ensure that there's that. You support capacity building opportunities, knowing that this is the issue, right? Because in that sense, that's why you see a lot of STEM programs that exist. There's organizations like WeTech, Girls' Voices, who really invest in girls. And from a young age, it's like proving to them and being like, you can develop an app, you can create technological tools. So those kind of capacity building needs to be supported. And we can do it through girls' clubs, in schools as well, really investing in that. Another big one is representation. Right? So for a lot of young girls who can look at and see Osasu hosting her show, then they can be like, I can do that. Right? If they see a woman, being the one who's producing and behind the camera, they can be like, I can do that. If you see a woman who's been, appointed as the finance minister, you're like, I can definitely do that. Right? Or look at Omombola Johnson. So when you start to see yourself being represented there,
it's easier to aspire.
Exactly. It's easy to then be able to say that I can do that. What's stopping me? So I think those are one of the things. And we also have to remember that girls are not a monolith, right? They're different kind of girls. Girls with disability, girls living with HIV, all of these things, and who should also see themselves there. And so I think those are like the 3 things that I would mention. I mean, there's a long list, but those are the things we know works.
Yes. I think for me, further than, I mean, at its very basic level, is what are you telling the girl child at home? At a very basic level, what is she growing up saying? What is she growing up hearing? I think this morning, as I was doing my makeup, I saw a video of a girl on the shade room who was having her hair done, and she, a 4-year-old girl, and she said, "Oh my God, I'm not beautiful." Where did she hear that? Where did she learn that? I think from an earlier age, if as a society, it takes a village, they say the village is telling these girls, you can do this, there's nothing he can't do that you can't do. I think that's a positive image to have. And I think further than obviously representation, there's a lot of social engineering that needs to be done with platforms like this. So let's not just have conversations like this on Women's
International Women's Day.
What International Women's Day? Let's ask people in media, how are we shaping the society to include these women? For example, even moving on from that, on a political level, on a legal level, in the legal system, in the law system, or whatever, I know for a fact that the Constitution provides for equal pay, for equal this and equal that, but there's actually no law enacting that. We're going to have that bill. Yeah, we're going to have that bill that was shut down in 2016. I don't know when that is coming up. I don't know when we're going to have that. I would really love to have that. Or for example, that you have said there's equal pay and you've said it in your constitution, but there's a law that says Nigerian women can work night shifts at factories. Why can't I work? I used to work in a factory when I lived in the UK. I could do the job. Why can't we have that here? So I think it's creating those safe spaces for women to be able to express that these are the things they want to do. Actually listen to them and take it. Listen to the opinions of women and not just have us be seen as emotional and we're just making a fuss about everything, because in this feminist discourse, that's usually what, comes out of it. We're just making a noise out of nothing. And these are things that really affect us. So yes, representation. Yes, social engineering. What is the child hearing from a young age? I think this builds up. For you in a HR position, a position of hiring and firing, I've been in a situation where there was a lady who was very qualified for a job, and my superior didn't want me to hire her because she had children.
Wow.
And I hired her. And in the whole time that lady worked in that organization, I never had an excuse of I need to dock her early because my child wasn't. She knows, give us the choice to compartment our lives. Yeah. We have it. We can do all things. We can work and have kids and go to the market and come home. We can do all of it. So let's be the judge of that. Let's make that decision. Don't make the decision for us.
That's brilliant. When I look at the younger generation of girls coming up, I'm so excited. So excited. Because most of them are so bold and audacious. They remind me of myself when I was little. Anytime you tell me to do that, I say, why? Why should I do that? Or why shouldn't I do that?
Exactly.
And so I'm not too worried about the younger generation, because they have women like us. They're paving the way, breaking down those glass ceilings, making sure that their roads are going to be smoother than ours. But let me rephrase Andy's question that he asked initially in more of a layman's language. You would hear the ordinary macho man on the street ask, women, people want everything on the platter of gold. You want affirmative action. You want everything free of charge. You don't want to study math, you don't want to study science, you don't want to study engineering, yet you still want to, get these jobs, and you still want to qualify for equal pay. How is that going to happen? How is that going to work? So as of today, in our space as, career women, do we have enough women that are qualified, equally as qualified as our male counterparts, for jobs in science, jobs in technology, jobs in engineering, jobs in mathematics, the jobs that are actually taking, production and creativity and productivity to the next level? Do we have those amount of women in our space today?
Right. I think for me, I'll be honest that I worry, because that feels like the start of a straw man's argument, right? Because then we have to prove that women can do this job and things like that. And for me, I always say the issue is not that, are there enough women? The issue is why are there not enough women, right? And that's the bigger issue. And in that sense, because of course there are, right? Because even just by going on Twitter, the co-founder of what is that app, that the saving money app?
Piggyvest.
Piggyvest.
Piggyvest, right? Odun, I think, is her name.
Yeah.
she's there. Do you know what I mean? There's so many Omambala Johnson, like I mentioned.
Exactly.
So there are women who are qualified. Those are just the ones we see.
I was going to come back to that.
Yeah, those are just the ones we see. I have friends that I know who have done this. But then, you know, what you also notice is that is the workplace also conducive for them when they get to these places? Because often when you get there, there's always this weird competition in which you have to do the work twice as hard in order to be considered just as good as your male counterpart. Like, can you code? Can you code in 24 hours? And it's like, do you code in 24 hours? You know what I mean? Like, why do I have to show you that? And is coding the only way to do tech? No, there's different ways of, you know, of doing tech. So there's those things that we don't take into consideration, or the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace.
Absolutely.
We don't take that, you know, into consideration at all, and how that creates a very toxic environment for a lot of women in science, and technology, where they're just like, you know what, I'm going to go start my own business, or I'm going to like have to create a different space. That's why you see, you know, the creation of women organizations as well, to be like, let's support each other. You know, and even within this funding space as well, what we've also seen is that women tech companies are not getting as much funding as their male counterparts. So for me, it's like, it's not that women are not there.
But I think there's been a shift with that, to be very fair.
But it's just coming up, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
as a result of the struggle.
Exactly. And as a result of the push to be like, because the question was like, but where are the women? And we're like, wait, are you for real? Are you serious? Yeah. And then we're like, there's this, there's this. Have you heard of this? And it's like, okay. I mean, you know, let them come and pitch.
So just to recap your answer, we do have enough qualified women. So for all the people listening out there, you've had Bukky, you've had Issy, we do have enough qualified women out there to make a difference in this sectors of organization. So let's talk now about the barriers that we need to break to ensure that women can succeed easier than we have it today. And we're not talking about getting it easier than our male counterparts. We're just asking for a level playing field so we can play, you know, at the same level.
So generous of us,
really.
After everything we've been through,
we still want you to have a seat. You know. I think for breaking of barriers, number one, conversations like this. Creating the safe spaces for people to have these conversations. And like we said in the beginning, have the conversation and move on to do action things. Inclusion in the workplace. So if you're in any position of creating policy, implementing policy, have a holistic 360 view of your hiring and firing practices, your organizational policies. Really take the pulse of your organizations and see what women do. In my lifetime as a HR professional, very few organizations have a succinct, complete sexual harassment policy.
Yes.
And it's ridiculous because we all have had a funny story and we couldn't go and report. Why? Why don't we have that safe space? Further back to what I said earlier, let the men also stand in for us and be with us on this struggle and understand that their voices are just as important as ours are in trying to end this struggle and create a level playing field. And I think, like you said, I am really not worried about this next level of women, this next generation of women, because they will be bolder than we are. They will break more barriers than we will ever break. And that is the aim. Isn't that what we want for the younger ones to do that? So I think we should just continue having these conversations, keep having these little super packs of women doing fantastic things in tech, in food, in design, in, you know. And I think, like I said, a lot of social engineering, because I think it comes down to an ideology thing, a way of thinking. A friend of mine, as educated as he is, once said that if he ordered a taxify and a woman picked him up, he would decline the trip.
Get out.
And he couldn't explain to me why. He couldn't tell me why. So do you get what I mean? It's a lot of changing. So the boys that are coming up, what are we telling them about women? And girls, what are we telling them? What are we telling them? You know, I think with that, you know.
Okay, just before you chip in, talking about barriers, two major barriers which we don't always talk about is religion and tradition. So I'd like you to
because that's where I was going
from that angle.
You know, that's what I was going, because I was going to say, like, I like that phrase, social re-engineering, right? But for me, I remember somebody asked me, like, what do we think we need to change in Nigeria? And I was like, for me, it's where we derive this gender and social norms that guides our beliefs, that guides our practices, and that guides what we do and how we think. Right? Because often when you ask people, why do they think women and men are not equal? They'll be like, because the Bible says so.
They can't give you a reason.
They didn't even tell me the verse. They just thought the Bible says so, you know. Or they'll be like, in our culture, men are the head. You know, and I'm like, oh, which one? You know? And so you start asking which culture, and how, you know, what is the definition between gender roles, and how do you define gender roles versus stereotypes that you grew up with, right?
Absolutely.
So often we find that even these inequalities that we see are being defended to the death, often to the death of women and girls, to say that because the Bible says so, we must do this. Because our culture says so, we must continue to do widowhood practices, that if a husband dies, the woman has to drink the water from his body and shave her head. Right? Because of that. So I think for me, it is time for us to start having conversations in which we're not necessarily calling people bad or evil, but to sit down and be like, why do we believe what we believe? Because that's what we've seen has worked with female genital mutilation.
Yes.
When you actually sit down with traditional leaders, you sit down with community leaders, you sit down with religious leaders, you sit down with the men and women who actually do the cutting, a lot of them are women, and sit down and be like, let's have a conversation. Why do we do these things? And the community can tell you that, oh, it's because if there's an issue, you know, if we don't do this, a baby is going to die, or if we do this, girl are going to be promiscuous. Okay, like, let's unpack that. How does that happen? Is there other ways we can make sure this doesn't happen? That really explain what happens through the, you know, the mutilation process that really destroys women's bodies.
Yes.
And then when you have that conversation, and when you see the light open, and they're just like, oh, it's like that.
Because people often don't do when they don't know.
They don't unpack. They don't unearth why we believe this.
You see, ladies, there's a cross-cutting theme here, and that's education and enlightenment.
Yes.
So that sticks out to me as the major solution, you know, to break these barriers down. In fact, internationally, we just got our first case of judgment against female genital mutilation. So that's a step in the right direction. But one thing that I personally believe, because obviously I do a lot of work in the sector, is a solution, a long-lasting solution for women and girls empowerment is economic liberation. A lot of people I've talked to, especially in the rural area, it all boils down to finances. I've gone to the north, Kano State, I've gone to Ngogo local government specifically and spoken to Islamic clerics and traditional rulers about girl-child marriage. And the reference is always, well, Prophet Muhammad did this, or the Quran says this. And I look at their financial situation, especially the parents who are marrying off their children at this age, and most of them are from lower income families. And I ask myself, okay, if the Quran truly says this, how come the people from wealthier families are not marrying off their daughters at the age of 13? How come it's you that's impoverished? So that topic of economic liberation and empowerment is key, because when you then talk to them about, okay, do you know that if your daughter is educated, that you can gain a better lifestyle in the longer term than you would gain right now from selling half, because that's what you're doing, selling half for pittance. And they start to realize, as you said, that light bulb switched on, and they're like, oh, okay, maybe I should actually send my daughter to school. She will take care of me when she's older. So I think economic liberation plays a central role in this conversation of, you know, women's empowerment, whether that even be sexual harassment. You know, a lot of women who are economically empowered face lesser chances of being sexually harassed.
Absolutely.
You know, and this is one thing that we need to, this is one conversation that we need to start having with the girl child, obviously, to have your own, not to depend on another man. You see on social media every day, there's always a joke about maybe when a new iPhone comes out and a girl is doing a yoga stretch or something, they're like, oh, she's preparing for the new iPhone. And conversations like that, people participate in it not knowing the degrading impact and effects it actually has on the entire female gender. So education, economic empowerment is a cross-cutting theme that I believe that we've established on this program. But as we reel the conversation back home now, as we end this segment of the program, what are some parting words of advice to the parents specifically? Because that's one group that we haven't really touched on. The parents in society, we talked about the traditional rulers, we've talked about the religious ruler, clerics a little. So what are some things that the parents can do in shaping the mindset of the girl child to become a more empowered and liberated woman?
Yeah, sorry, I just also want to speak to that economic liberation, because one of the things we try to do in our work, so for example, here in Abuja we were working in Petty and Lambata, and one of the things we were realizing that for a lot of women, the issue around access to contraception, right, being able to decide if, when and how they can have children, was that they often maybe didn't have money to be able to pay for it, and their partners, sometimes they were married, sometimes they were not, would not give them money for it. I would not allow them to. So one of the things we did was to say, let's train them. They can, some of them were doing businesses already or had ideas. Train them, set up a cooperative, you know, and then they would start doing that. But what we realized that it's actually increased violence against them.
Because then they were stepping out.
They were having too much money. So then we realized that along with the, you know, in terms of providing money, we needed to be talking to the men, to the mothers, to the parents, to be like, you know, her having money doesn't mean that you are, you know, your power is being taken away. You know what I mean? Is that, you know, it's just basically supporting you and the home and making sure that you have a better life together. So I think, as what you were saying, is that all of these issues are linked together. We have to do it in tandem with each other, because if we do one without the other,
we drop a ball somewhere.
You know, we do drop the ball somewhere. And like, and just to go back to what you're saying, is that parents play a particular role. Because we started seeing who were the ones who were influencing them when they were making these decisions. Often it was their mothers, right? And their fathers too played a role in terms of the head of the home, but mothers played a very important role as well. And so the education that we want to give to young people, we also have to give to their parents, because we realize that often the issues are parents don't know how to communicate with their children.
No, very often, absolutely.
Right? A lot of us joke about, you know, your parents just have to send you one eye like that, and then you behave. But there's a difference between sitting down with your child and having conversations about what the world is like, you know, how much you believe in them, how much you support them, having conversations with them in terms of like sexual and reproductive health, which we want to avoid because it's like controversial. If you talk to them about it, they will just go out there and do bad things. But parents have to realize that they're the most trusted person in their kid's life. No matter how many surveys you do, that's what you find out. It's parents. And then in Nigeria, you have like religious leaders and teachers and things like that, but it's parents. So it's really up to parents to start to show, if you want a gender equal world, that even if your daughter is going to get married and leave your house, she's still your daughter. That doesn't mean you lose her forever. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't invest in her or love her as much as you love your son who's carrying your name. Right? And that if you want a gender equal world, it starts with you and how you model that behavior. That you're not sending the girl to go to the kitchen while the boy can do his homework and play, right? Absolutely. Those little things, and you know, reading those books and really having those conversations and not leaving it to the mother as well, being properly present as a father. So I think for me, yes, these are all critical parts of the whole, and they play a really, really big role in doing that.
Just in addition to what she said, I mean, you're taught in social studies that the basic building block of a society is the home. And I'm one of the people who really believe that, like she pointed out, in most home settings, it's always the mother and the children. And the fathers have the first relationship a woman learns to have is with her dad. So we need to create a space where men are also telling their girl child that you can do, you see me, what I'm doing, you can do it. Be present, positive fixtures in their lives. And and not leave it to the women. Send your children to training camps, expose them to the world as best as you can, because the best thing you can give your children is an education, and not just an education in the classroom, like literacy, in that you have a critical understanding of the way the world works, so that you know what is accessible to you, what you can do, what is on hand for you to achieve. I think that is what it is. So parents, just reinforce positive imaging, positive commentary in your kids' lives, and it sticks with you, it grows up with you, and you can carry that through.
Sorry, can I just say one more thing? And the other thing is also the issue of safety. You have to be a safe space for your children. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing, especially in Nigeria, that we find, is that there's so many few safe spaces for young people. Schools are not safe spaces. Not primary school, not secondary schools, not universities. Churches and mosques and places of worship sometimes are not safe spaces. So parents, you have to be the safe space. You have to teach them to be safe, and then force those spaces to be safe for your children and for yourself. And that's so important.
I agree. That's a fine place to leave it. Isi and Bukky, thank you so much for this conversation. It's really, really been a very educative one. So please, key takeaways from this conversation. Parents, please invest more in your children, invest more in the girl child. Be a safe space for them to feel comfortable to talk to you about different things going on in their lives, and you can advise them about. And gentlemen, it's okay to be a feminist. Feminism isn't a bad word. Feminism is a man or a woman who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of both sexes. And I believe most of you out there are feminists. So join us in this struggle. Join us to be able to achieve our full potentials in society. Thank you so much for watching the lifestyle segment of the weekend show. We'll be right back.